So I wanted to move us along, um, pick up some things from the discussion on seeking, and then move on to the next logical issue, which is the whole question of evaluating the sources that we find and being systematic in how we evaluate them and how we search for stuff. And there was a few things that came up, some of which are loosely not very, you know, connected. There is certainly somebody asked, about the concept of satisficing, which is a strange word, and how do you go about finding sources when you reach a dead end, which is a problem. And sometimes when you reach the dead end, the answer is, well, is the end, is it important? There is a concept particularly in ethnography, of theoretical saturation, that you stop searching or you stop doing research or gathering data when you reach a point where you're confident that nothing else that you will find will substantially alter the conclusions that you're going to draw from what you've got already. So I guess that goes back to the concept of satisficing in searches. And I suppose it may also answer the question, what do you do when you reach a dead end? Where you can't find something that's out there that looks like it might be interesting, but you can't find it. Well, the question is, how likely is it that this will make a significant difference to what you're doing? And if it's, not much, then you accept that you can't find it. The problem is, of course, those half-seen ideas that you just can't run down are very often ones that actually you might feel, using your gut instinct, would make a very significant difference. And this question of gut instinct is something that comes up. Several people, picked it up from various different points where people make judgments about sources using gut instinct. And really what you need to do, particularly in what we're going to look at, is train that gut instinct. And it does relate to the problem, indeed, of professors going straight from high school students to being full professors, and therefore not being able to make clear the steps of training your gut instinct, which is probably interesting. There's a couple of there is a question. Two things that were picked up as floating things. One is somebody picked up the DS Quintera tweet about the fake citation, which is running up and down through the world. The link is in one of David's postings, and it's worth having a look. It is, in summary, a tweet to an article, a reference to an article that never existed about how to reference things, which was put into then a number of journal articles and the references on a number of the bibliography of a number of articles, and then gets proliferated around the web. The theory is that people looked at this reference and thought, oh, that's an article that I really should have made use of. I haven't actually looked at it, but I'll put it in my bibliography anyway. One thing that whole controversy has exposed, however, several people in various follow-ups to that tweet have pointed out that they have written articles, had them submitted to academic journals, and references that they had not put in there have been inserted in the bibliography. And several people have pointed to this as possibly being a sharp practice by one particular academic publisher in the recent past. That a publisher is actually inserting references into people's articles, bibliography rather than into the body of the article, which helps to inflate the citation count for their articles. So it's an interesting practice. The other question, of course, that people asked was, how do you cite a video? And the answer to that is, in fact, that there are now guides. There you are. The general format for citing online videos in MLA is as follows. Title of video, YouTube if it's on YouTube, uploaded by screen name, day, month, year, and the web source. And in fact, that is a link to Berkeley. And if you click through the link, it'll take you to the Berkeley Library, and it actually shows you where is berkeley.edu located. It's not the Berkeley in California. It's a different one, I think. But there's a set of formats and some examples. So for almost everything, there are formats and examples now which people have made up to add to how you cite electronic sources, how you cite web publications. There's probably recommended ways for citing tweets as well. So you can, in fact, find those now. But the one thing that came back in the discussion as well, which is not necessarily related to seeking, but it is important. There was a couple of clusters of points. One, of course, is the question about the organization of academic libraries. And it comes up in BIDIX, and several people have picked it up, that academic libraries should reorganize the way in which they organize their search materials to make it easier for students to do this. And in fact, this is exactly what the UCC library has done, because what it has done is it has replaced the old databases portal with this one search box on the front page into which you can put stuff, and it will search across all the databases and give you all the results in a single search. And they've done that, I'm going to say about 18 months ago, in order to bring, so it makes searching look simpler. It's an improvement, I suppose, but it does remove some of the richness and texture. So, how you feel about that is open to question. The other thing that arose, which is not directly related to seeking, but it is an important topic in scholarship generally, is the question of the density of academic language. And how complicated and convoluted it is. And there's a couple of things about that. There is undoubtedly in many disciplines a need for specialist technical vocabulary. And to get into the discipline and understand the field, you probably need to figure out what the big words are and work them out. And we need to meet words regularly like epistemology or ontology, and have an understanding of how they're used, and subsets. And of course, subsections of academia can use the same word in a completely different way in two different disciplinary fields, which is always a problem with interdisciplinary work. But there's a couple of other issues and problems with scholarly writing. One is that it is often unclear because the people who are doing the writing may not have necessarily worked out what their conclusion is. And they're actually trying to figure it out while they're writing. And if they have not actually got clarity in their own mind about what the issue is, then they're not going to have clarity in their writing. The other issue, of course, which is the difference between academic and public writing, public-facing writing, is this whole question of, do academics just write for each other? And the answer is, to a certain extent, they do. There is a presupposition that they are writing for a scholarly audience, and that therefore they're, as it were, speaking quickly and in shorthand to that audience. But in many fields, particularly in the humanities and in ethics and in parts of information technology or in science communication or in public health, for example, there's to a certain extent an onus on people to make their material publicly understandable and publicly comprehensible without too much misunderstanding. And so that is an area where science communication is failing, but it is certainly a topic of very active discussion and evolving practice, particularly in the sciences. And it's almost as if science communication is kind of emerging as a separate inter and multidisciplinary field to address the problem of communicating complicated things quickly. The other problem, of course, is that text does not always lend itself to clearly expressing ideas which sometimes are best delivered visually. And finally, there's the dreaded question of gatekeeping. For a lot of academics, use of complex technical terminology is a way to keep the plebs out, quite literally. And some of them, not so much these days, but certainly it was a feature of academic life and academic communities in the past, that only the in crowd understood the jargon. And therefore you had to be sort of carefully over years inducted, like joining a secret society, into the jargon and the technology or the terminology, and then you would understand and be able to participate in the discourse. And sometimes complicated terminology conceals a lack of, any great significant discovery in a field. This discovery, if it's, significant and important, then it will turn up on headlines, expressed crisply and concisely. And the more obscure it is, possibly the more limited its contribution may be. I'm a little cynical about that, but it's certainly something that people picked up on. I have always held the view, particularly in the humanities, that there is no reason why humanities writing should not be accessible to someone with, leaving certain level of education or maybe first year college. I don't see the justification for that level of complexity, and I do prize clarity in writing. Um, Having said that, it's a difficult thing to achieve. Simplicity is hard. So, but those are the things that came out of that. Um, I want to make that discussion disappear now. I want to move along to talk about evaluating sources, which is it's a huge, but it's a simple task. And so last year's video is there, and there's a discussion thread. What I want people to do, one of these is the PowerPoint, and one of them isn't, and I'm going to have to get rid of the one that isn't. But what I want, here we go, people to think about here is, the question is, how do you locate and manage information in an information-rich age, in an age of abundance, when there's so much stuff out there? How do we find and evaluate sources? And the target, really, this is a literature review. It's on a field of chemistry. It's about DNA. We don't understand the content. That's not important. What's important is not the content here. What's important is that instead of being laid out as slabs of text, this literature review is presented as a map which shows from the 1820s the sequence of journal articles and how they quote one another across 3 strands of research, and then how in the 1950s and 60s they begin to cross over and cross-fertilize each other until, of course, then towards the end, and probably off the top of the diagram, you have eventually the emergence of a consensus and an understanding of DNA and how it works. So what's interesting about this is that it shows the connections visually, right? And visualization is a powerful tool for understanding debates. Debates in history, like whether World War I was an accident, or whether it was Germany's fault, or whether it fell on a scale of things in between. Whether the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima was to end World War II, or was it in fact to send a signal to the Soviets that America had this weapon? And was it in fact the first act of the Cold War? So we need to work out that's part of the destination that we're heading towards. How do we map debates? But before we can get to that mapping, we have to find stuff. We have to find the things we want to use, and we have to make sense of them before we can share this back as an understanding, or as an article, or whatever we're sharing it back to people as a contribution to knowledge. So that's where we're going. One of the important steps of getting there is asking some questions about the sources we find. How did you find it? Where is it located? Who's the author? What's their qualifications? Who's the publisher? What's the reputation of the publisher? Do they have particular bias? You know a lot of these, right? You were probably given a one-page handout as undergraduates, or you got a 1-hour class in the library when you were told how to do this. And the library still runs those classes, and it's quite possible it's beneficial to take them. They're now all online, because it will give you a different perspective to mine, right? The thing about it is that very often this is done on the basis of, here's the handout, this is how you evaluate sources, and you punch holes in it, and you put it in the ring binder, and you put it away, and you never look at it again, okay? We're going to take a slightly different approach to that, which is that I want you to actually come up with your own criteria for evaluating sources. So what I want you to do is come up with a set of criteria, and I want you to score them. Right? So come up with some scoring system, a scoring grid. It could be A, B, C, D, E. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could be 1 to 10. Whatever set of criteria work for you, I want you to, and sort of 5 to 7 criteria that you've decided on and you will remember. Now, how you can do this, every academic library in the world has a web page. Oh look, Google is suggesting it to me. I must have searched for this before. Every academic library in the world has a set of recommendations on how to do this. They all vary slightly. So rather than giving you a list, I want you to forage around some of these. And I want you to look at, That might be. Let's see. Where is this? K-State. It's an Okay, Kansas State. Well, Big Five. Okay, so here they put the main criteria up here in bold, and they've repeated them, and they've got a video on it, and then they've got separate sections on websites, which is interesting. It's a fairly short page. Some of these are longer. Colorado State. Let's have a look at what Colorado State have to say. American ones will fit further up on the Google search because they get more search hits because they have more students looking at them. Cork has a page, but it will be very far down. Source evaluation, relevance to the topic. See, now look at this. There's no bullet points here. They're conveying much of the same sort of information, but they're presenting it differently. And they have slightly different set of criteria. Kind of looks more developed and thoughtful, but harder to remember. So you might have to extract from that. So where's this? Well, actually, let's do this. Some of these are presented as images. It may be that it will work better for you if you present it as an image, or if you conceive of it. Author, bias, content, date. That's a little bit thin as a set of criteria, but it's good. This is the CRAP test, several different versions of the CRAP test. Currency, relevance, authority, which does not mean who the author was. It means, do they have some experience writing about what they're writing about? Accuracy and purpose, right? What is the purpose of these? So you'll find several different versions of that, and it may be that will work. There's also other ones. Here's this one, HIPPO. Historical content, intended audience, point of view, purpose, outside information. It's different completely. There's some overlap, but there's also some differences there. There's related searches, thank you very much. Some of these are organized in circles. Is it useful to have it organized in circle? I don't know. There's another version of the CRAP test where they have in fact eliminated one of the A's. They have combined authority and audience into one. Does that work? That doesn't work. No. I don't like that. That's my immediate thought about that one, because authority and audience are two very different things. So some of these are longer lists presented as worksheets. You may go for that. Although the thing about this is there's a scoring system: excellent, good, average, poor. 4-point sort of full word scoring. That works too. The question is, one of these is going to work for you. Again, it goes back to a point that somebody made, quite rightly, in the seeking discussion. Picked a quote. Was it that it seems as if professors have gone straight from high school to college and have forgotten how to do the basics, and can't explain simple things. So I could produce a very lovely, complicated, graphically exciting evaluation checklist and give it to you, and you'd say that's beautiful, and as I said, you put it in your folder and you'd never use it again. What you will use is a set of criteria that you make up yourself, because you will have thought about it and internalized it and asserted your own ownership of that process, and then you are more likely to actually make use of that when you're looking at sources. It will help to sharpen. It's training your gut instinct. And it's training your gut instinct to step through this process of seeking for stuff and finding, and everybody has a different process. And every source is different, and there are some sources, for instance, Twitter. How do you evaluate a Twitter feed? I mean, a lot of us would follow Tony Connolly on Brexit because he's a journalist who's worked on the field and he has expertise and authority on it. For simple, straightforward news, people like Richard Chambers tweets out the stuff every evening on the pandemic, so we would follow him for a particular type of information. For a different type of information, David Higgins tweets out some graphs and charts. And there's a Twitter called Illustrate This, which tweets them out in a different format. So those are useful. The other thing that's interesting or challenging, for example, is how do you evaluate visual sources? How do you evaluate YouTube videos? How do you deal in an age of deepfake videos, where people can produce videos of people saying almost anything, And I wonder if it's possible here. In fact, we'll just use this. Oh no, we'll get rid of that. There's an interesting, right, let's have a go here. Deep fake. See if the video I want turns up if you Google this. Yes, this is the one, the first one here, Jordan Peele. This is a video where, and it's on YouTube, it appears to, what happened is that Jordan Peele wrote a script, words that Barack Obama would never have said, and they used deep fake video techniques to make Obama's, particularly the mouth part of the video, move in keeping with the script. So if you watch the video, it's scary. And that's from 2018, so that's 2 years old now. The technology of deep fake video is much better. Depends. The ability to fake video, whether, let's put it this way, it's more technically easier, and the quality of video that you can produce is more convincing. So how do you evaluate video in this age? So this is another reason why this exercise is important, because over the course of your research lifetime, you will have to incorporate new sorts of things into your research, and you will have to have criteria for evaluating them. So it's therefore something that you need to own. I have another thing in here in terms of setting. So there's a couple of readings about evaluating sources. Doing the task is more important than getting stuck in the readings, but certainly have a look at them. But I've also suggested that you have a look at this systematic literature review on mindfulness, and I've said particularly part 3, right? Because a system, when we're looking for stuff, we tend to go out there and find whatever we get in the databases, we pull it together, and that's fine. A systematic literature review, I've downloaded it, it's here in preview. I've said that part 3 of this is what's important, which is the method. It's a systematic literature review about mindfulness and sustainable consumption, so there are topics that we can kind of understand. But the method is what's interesting. They start off with a search of 2 different databases, and they come up with almost 1,200 articles and PhD dissertations on the topic. And then they go through and they decide on certain criteria, and they reduce the sample size based on those criteria. Some of the criteria, for example, it must be a peer-reviewed journal, or it may be a PhD dissertation, because they're looking for material that has been subject to some sort of scrutiny before it's been published. It must be in, if it's an academic journal, it must be in English or German, so they restrict it to those languages, presumably for reasons to do with their ability to assess the content of the articles. They have a number of other criteria which they decide on for reducing this sample down. And you should have a look at how they do that. And at the end of the day, they get this 1,137 papers that they originally found, they get it down to 7. Another criteria is that these sources they will use must include original empirical research, which eliminates a lot of papers, brings the number down quite a lot. So they're looking for real, original, hard research. They're doing this with a team of researchers. There's at least 6 people involved in refining this process down. They have external experts and all sorts of stuff. So they have time and money to do this, which you wouldn't have. But the process is interesting. And then they go on to analyze the data. And look, these are the 7 papers that they found, and they then look at the content of those papers and what light it sheds on mindfulness in purchasing and sustainable consumption. So they're looking for actual solid evidence on this. And they've got it down to those 7 papers that are worthwhile based on their criteria. So that's an interesting process. This is a couple of years old. It's now getting to the stage, particularly in the sciences. In the humanities, we tend to do what we would think of as a narrative literature review, which is basically you just have a rummage in Google Scholar, you find 15 or 20 papers that are recent and relevant, and you write about what they say. But it's become much more the case, particularly in the sciences, that this sort of systematic literature review is now the only way to do the literature review. And the criteria mean that it can be repeated. So one of the things in this, and it's in Appendix A of the paper, is the actual search terms that they used. Conclusion, Appendix A, here it is, right? So there's a search string of Boolean terms that they used which match mindful, and they use the star character as a wildcard, which is an important part of Boolean searching. So they have search for mindful asterisks, which will catch mindful and mindfulness and mindfully, everything that has mindful and any other characters after it within the word, and sustainable or environment or ecologic or ethic or whatever. So they're using the and or, and they actually link it not just to anything that might be sustainable or a synonym for it, but also, what's the other one? Consumption or behavior or lifestyle. So they're looking for the overlap of several different sets of terms. And in fact, what I've done here we go, is that I went to the library and I took that Appendix A and I pasted that very complicated Boolean search in there and hit the search button. It took a while. There's lots of bracketing to do the whole priorities and stuff, and it produces a set of results. This is from the library's one search, right? And that produced almost 500,000 results. But certainly top of the list there is stuff about mindfulness and sustainability. Now, the original research was done by that team of Germans in like it was published in 2018. It was done a couple of years before that. So by running the same search now, I can get an update. So, hey, I don't need all the results from forever. Let's just see what came out in the past 3 years, roughly since the study was done. And again, there you go. That reduces it to 150,000 articles. Let's reduce it to the past 12 months. There's a couple of things that I'm not reducing here. I'm not excluding by language. That's slightly different. And it comes down to 64,000 results. Now, if I was to apply the other methods that they use to narrow their thing, I could probably bring that down. But in order to do that, I'd have to read through all the article abstracts. Well, I could exclude web resource. I could bring it down to journal article, for example, which brings it down to 13,000. So essentially what they had to do manually is now largely built in. I can make it peer reviewed. So this type of systematic literature, that brings it down to 11,000 that the library has access to. I haven't checked the ad results beyond the library's box, right? So what that article on the systematic literature review of mindfulness and sustainable consumption, the methodology that they detail in section 3 of that, you don't have 6 research assistants, but you do have some search engines that will allow you to narrow the searches. And of course, you can then make a note that I did this search and I checked these boxes. I could narrow it down to specific fields if I wanted to. Language is not open. Well, let's just narrow it. Narrowing it down to English isn't going to give me a whole lot because most of the sources the library accesses are English. But this is how you can, be systematic about it. And then you can record that search and rerun it at some point in the future. So again, it's a question of thinking about how you systematically look for things. It's in there as that. I have to create a Zotero group so that people who want to use Zotero can share what they find and their source evaluations in there, and we can see it very quickly. What you can do in the discussion thread is, even without using Zotero, you create your set of criteria and then create a search string like that search string in the mindfulness article. So come up with some multiple terms. Let's just not pick one word and hit it. Let's find some synonyms. Let's use our inner thesaurus, to find sources and cast a wider and more organized net. And then I will set up the Zotero group so that people can share it in that for practice. But you can also just put the, 7 to 10 things in here as a posting with title, web reference, your criteria, how you scored it. And once you've made up a grid of some sort for your criteria or a list, you can just paste it down from one to the other and change the values in it. Include some bad ones to show that your criteria will allow you to identify sources which, for whatever reason, are not good. Try to include something in video. Try to include a Twitter feed. Um, cast your net wide here so that you experience this whole process of evaluation and get value out of this. And it does seem like a lot of time to spend a whole week on a simple thing like this. But getting the simple things right, it's like cooking. If you can there are 4 sauces in cooking, and if you master the 4 basic sauces, you can be a master chef. So this is one of the 4 basic sauces of academic research. And we will see how it works out. And again, no right answer, no wrong answer. What works for you is the right answer.